Hi everyone, National Master Steven Adams here. Today I'd like to share with you an important attacking concept. One of the main principles of attacking is to include all of your pieces in the attack. As it follows, if you're defending, you should try to include all of your pieces in the defense. That's the obvious corollary. But if we know our opponent wants to include pieces in the defense, it's worthwhile then to look for ways to prevent that. I call this prophylactic attacking. Usually in chess, prophylaxis is the act of trying to prevent your opponent from accomplishing their goals. This is usually thought of defensively, right? If we're trying to stop our opponent or prevent them from doing something, that's usually thought of, well, you're trying to prevent them from attacking us or prevent a threat that they're making. It's usually thought of in a defensive context. But if our opponent's goal is to bring pieces to the defense, if their idea is to defend, then prophylaxis then can actually be used as an attacking weapon. So here's an example from my most recent over-the-board tournament. I was playing white here. As we can see, maybe you can sense that white should have some kind of advantage. We have more space, we have a lot of pawns controlling the center, and so we have a very strong center and some nice attacking prospects. We can see that it's possible for us to gain space on the king side. So right now, it's an important moment. One thing I see often is that players, they can get a good position going into the middle game or coming out of the opening, but a lot of times people get into here and they make a couple of slow moves, and then suddenly that sort of dynamic advantage, it dissipates and the opponent gets to defend just fine and everything's okay. So knowing how to be able to capitalize on advantages like this is very important and will really help improve your play if you can master this aspect. So right now, it's in a very important moment, and I'll give you a couple seconds if you want to pause to think about what you would do here. So 3, 2, 1. The best thing for white to do, and the most urgent thing, is to play the move f5. And this is very, very important. Because if we don't play f5, black's going to play f5. Let's say we make a developing move, a very natural move like bishop to e3. Then after f5, suddenly black is going to be able to develop the bishop. They can set up a very solid pawn structure. And note that white's bishop is boxed out. White's pawns are also very immobile. It's going to be hard to develop this. If you want to move the knight, you're going to have to bring it out to a square it can't really do anything, like this g3 now is going to be binding into nothing. So if black is to play f5, I really do believe that they're going to be just fine. Even if we take it en passant to try to open it, well, then we just removed one of our best pawns, our most powerful pawn on the board, this e5 pawn that was constricting them so much. Suddenly, black's position's wide open. They have no problems at all. So instead, if we play f5, they're prevented from doing it. And instead of our light square bishop being boxed out, suddenly, they're boxed out. They can't develop their light square bishop. They can't bring it to e6. And there is this principle that your opponent's good pawn move is also your good pawn move. So if we know that they want to play f5, we can play f5 and beat them to the punch. We want to be the first ones to play that. So now my opponent in this position played the move bishop to g5. And this is the second big moment of the game. Because now we really feel like we have a very nice grip. We have nice control of these 4 squares with our pawns. We have a lot more space. But our opponent's doing what they should be doing, which is trying to trade pieces. If you have less space, you should try to trade pieces and make it to an endgame where that space won't be as relevant or it might even become a weakness. So this is where white really needs to capitalize, because there are some good ways to go about continuing this, and there are some not good ways to continue this attack. So if you want to think about how you can continue it, you can pause here, and now continue in 3, 2, 1. So the best thing for white to do, and what I did, is played the move f6. And this is a really, really important move because, for one, we're freeing up this bishop on this diagonal, and also we're freeing up the f6 square. Black is more or less forced to take it, right? If they try to trade the bishops first, well, then suddenly they're going to run into big, big, big problems on these dark squares here. You can imagine. I don't even know what black does. Bishop e6, and they're gonna get mated so quickly on g7. So black needs to take this pawn on f6. But after this pawn takes f6, suddenly this g7 pawn is no longer there. And here I traded the bishops, and we can drop a rook on f6. And once you see this sequence of with f6, that we're actually sacrificing a pawn, but in the process we're opening up all of our pieces, and this knight is hit, h7's hit, and we really can bring knight g3, and queen h5 can come up next. We can see that all of white's pieces have a way to attack the black king, but we're also cutting off the defense. That is what this rook f6 move is so important for, is that when we do this, black cannot move their f-pawn. They're completely stuck. They cannot bring any pieces into defense. Now their g-pawn is weak as well. And you can see, you can take several moves now, but there's just no way for black to try to get pieces over here to help their king. My opponent here played king g7, but this unfortunately just dropped the knight on c6. But I really think that it was rather dire by this point. Let's say I make a natural move like bishop to e6. I think white could follow up with just knight g3 and queen h5 coming in next. King g7 like they played, queen h5. And here are just threats on g5, h7, queen h6 coming up. This is just immense trouble for black. If they try to defend rook h8 just to stop this, you have queen h6 check, king g8 only move, knight h5, with mate coming on the g7 square. So, yeah, I really don't think after rook f6 it can't really be held. The game ended with king g7, rook takes c6, bishop e6. But even though the knight's gone, the problems aren't gone, and we see in just a few moves knight h5 check, and the knight comes into f6. The black is able to take this rook, but it doesn't matter because it's mate in 2 after queen h5, king g7, queen takes h7, mate. So let's go back at the beginning. This attack was really able to happen because of this f5 and f6 move. Some of the ways that might not have been so good that were very tempting, you could have thought about, let's say, taking on g5, taking, and then going f6. But this way of doing things isn't nearly as strong because after black plays g6, well, black's queen is outside of the pawn chain and can help defend the g7 square. So it's a lot more difficult to take advantage of these dark squares. And plus, white has trouble getting their queen involved now too because, well, any kind of queen involvement might just end up with a queen trade. So, yeah, I really think that this might have been the one good way to continue the attack. But once you see this idea that you can blockade with the rook on the f6 square, this is just extremely powerful, and black's defensive task here is basically impossible. So, yeah, I hope that was instructive and that you could see how we were able to, by keeping the defenders out of the game, we were able to attack very naturally and win the game pretty quickly from that point.